We are the Southern Kentucky chapter of Wild Ones, which is a nationwide nonprofit organization, and we work to promote native plants, particularly their use in the home landscape. So we host hikes, native plant sales, educational workshops, and presentations like this one, home garden tours, and we do volunteer work to establish or restore native plants in the wild or a formal setting. All of our events are open to the public. You can find more information about all of our events on our website, soki.wildones.org. You can also find more information about us and our events on our Facebook page. You can find us at Wild Ones, Soki chapter. We also have a Facebook group where we welcome discussions all about native plants. And you can find that group if you search on Facebook, Wild Ones Soki FB group. So thank you, Janine, for agreeing to do this talk and recording it for our resources page on our website and our YouTube channel. And I'll hand it over to Janine.
So the topic tonight is designing a small garden bed and turning it into not just a flower garden bed, but a microecosystem. When I said small, I meant 4 foot by 4 foot, which is about as small as garden bed really usually is. Other than that, it's just a little patch of flowers, but here we go. A little bit about me, in case you were wondering. I am a plant enthusiast. I have no formal training. I've been gardening for about 10 years. I'm currently the treasurer of our Soki chapter. I'm in the Franklin Simpson Garden Club. I have taken Kentucky Master Gardener classes and finished them. And I'm currently taking landscape design classes through National Garden Club. And I am a former Girl Scout. Oh, I had little pictures to go with those. There we go. There's the Girl Scout, which they're big into plants and nature and stuff. And so that got me started when I was about, 4, probably. So why? Why are we here talking about native plants tonight? What's the big deal? Basically, if nothing is eating your plants, they are not part of the ecosystem. So we encourage people to use plants that the critters around us will eat. And also we're providing what critters need. They food, water, shelter, and a place to raise their young. And this way we're healing the earth one garden bed at a time. So we're starting small and building. So that's the goal. The goal is to design a garden bed that's part of the ecosystem and that is a microecosystem in itself. So food, we start our ecosystem with food for the critters. And we're going to start with plants. And what is a native plant? We use that term quite a lot. Native means born here. But we also mean not just born here, because a lot of stuff is born here, but evolved here is perhaps a more accurate way to describe it. And you may have heard of hardiness zones, and sometimes people will say, what zone are you in? And that is a good way to know your temperature. But if you follow the yellow band all the way across, Kentucky's in the yellow band, but so is Arizona. And so this plant, the saguaro cactus, is native to North America. So you could say it's native to America, and it's in our zone, but it does not grow in Kentucky. So there's more to it than just zone and the United States of America. And so we also talk about ecoregions. And these are areas of the planet that have similar soil, rainfall, that kind of thing. And they start off with pretty big ecoregions. I'm going to drill down to Kentucky. So the big eastern half of North America there is the eastern temperate forests. Now you notice the tip of Florida is not included because that's tropical, not temperate. And you can see the dark green patch, that's the Appalachians, that's the hills. So we're going to drill down to Kentucky. The part of Kentucky we're in is the flat part. So we are in the southeastern plains. And we're zooming in. And here is our little area of Kentucky. And you can see 3 separate zones in there. The white, the light orange, and the dark orange. And if we zoom in a little bit, one of them's turned green. But so the county that Bowling Green, Kentucky's in has 3 different ecoregion zones. The top northern tip of it is the Caseyville Hills, and then below that is the Mammoth Cave Uplands, and then underneath it, that green stretch going across, and that's where I live, is the Western Pennyroyal Karst Plain. And so even in one county, you can have 3, 4, 5, even more eco regions. And why do we care? This shows you some of the soils in those 3 eco regions. And the plain, the Pennyroyal Plain, that used to be a great inland sea, and its bedrock is limestone. That's it, just limestone. But if you move up into the hills, you'll start to see sandstone, shale, and even coal when you get up into the higher hills. And so the soil, the underlying bedrock affects our soil, and the soil, of course, affects what kind of plants will grow. And that's why we care about ecoregions. So ecoregion is a combination of the hardiness zone you're in, the soil type, the amount of rainfall you get. All of these images are from a website called bplant.org, very useful resource, and I'll be talking about it a little bit later. There's one more way to check on your soil. If you go to the USDA Web Soil Survey webpage, you can get a wonderfully detailed map. This is about a 5-acre plot. This happens to be my plot. And it shows that I have 3 different types of soil just on my little piece of property here. The MO, A, and MOB are actually the same kind of soil. The A and the B just refer to how steep the slope is. But you can see I've got NH, Nicholson, and MO, Mount View, 2 different kinds of soil. And this orange line right in the center here, that is the lowest point on the property. That's where the rain collects. What difference does it make? Well, it's the same kind of dirt. The soil is what they call thin, fine, silty, non-calcareous loess over clay residuum weathered from limestone. But you can see that there is in the Nicholson, there's a hard pan, a fragipan, which is not quite as hard as hardpan, but you start digging and you'll hit this solid stuff and your shovel won't go any deeper. So on that half of my property, my trees are not doing very well. I didn't know about this when I started. And I put a tree in there and its roots can only get down about 2-3 feet. And then it hits this fragipan and it is hard for the roots to get through. So even if you have areas in your yard and one does well and one does different, you may want to look into the soil and see if that might be a reason why. This gives you a little bit more information about the place you're living. Okay, so earlier I sent out some requests that suggested that you think about what kind of garden bed you want to design. What's your dream? And there was a little worksheet that went along with it. I'm going to go over it real quick. Here's some things people like to think about when they're designing their dream garden. Some of that we'll talk about during this, and some of it, you want to name your garden. Some people like to give their gardens little names like, Monarch's Paradise or Susie's Bench, place to sit or something like that. So this gives you an idea, just to play with it and think, what do I want to get out of this? Why am I doing this? Some more ideas about things you want to do. Maybe you really love a specific butterfly, and so you want to make sure you're including the flowers that butterfly likes and the food that caterpillar likes to eat. There's a meadowlark. Design principles. Designing a garden is art. It incorporates a lot of artistic things, and these are some things that art people worry about. The balance, simplicity, rhythm, line, proportion, unity. Most of us don't really think about that. We might notice it if it's wrong or if it's missing, but unless you really put some thought into it, may not occur to you to put that into your garden design as well. But design dreams are not always something we can make happen. Our dreams don't always turn out the way we hope because there are practical considerations we need to concern ourselves with. And here is a list of some of them. You may love a very sunny plant that loves sun, but the only place you have to put your bed is very shady. So your plant's not going to be happy. So you may have to choose a different plant. It may not get enough rain. It may get too much wind, all kinds of reasons. Maybe there is a gas pipe that goes underneath and you can't dig down very deep. All of these things impact our dream gardens, and we have to adjust to the reality of what's available to us. Is it right next to a walkway where everybody goes? Is it underneath a window, too close to the house? Is there a tree shading it? All of these kind of things. So these are some of the things. There was a check sheet, a list to go through and sort of just take notes so you have all that information for you when you're ready to go. And the other things we had said, one of the reasons we're doing this is to provide what creatures need. So in addition to all of our dream desires and our practical requirements, we want to make sure that our garden bed includes food, water, shelter and a place for at least some small critters to raise their young. Another thing that we're hoping to do, we're healing the garden, healing the earth one garden bed at a time. Well, one by one is really slow if only one or two of us is doing it. So the only way this is going to work is if those of us here tonight attract a whole bunch of more people to do what we're doing, and so on and so on and so on. So a lot of people are doing this all at the same time. So we want our garden bed to attract not just pollinators, but also people, and people who may not know that they want to do native plants. If your garden bed is in a public spot, it's really nice if it's something that people will stop and say, hey, that looks nice. I want that in my yard. And so that could be another goal we have. A lot of people say they think native plants, that's a good idea, but they've heard native plants are messy or don't look good. Native plants can be perfectly, wonderfully behaved garden plants if we choose them properly and put them in the style of garden that people are used to seeing. They can be messy too. I mean, I'm a messy gardener myself and a lazy gardener. Even if I were using traditional garden plants, my garden tends to look kind of messy, but it doesn't have to. And I do try to keep my areas that are more public, I try to keep them a little neater and more attractive to what people are expecting. It's just trying to convince people that this is something they can do in their own yard. One way to do that is to sort of make it look connected, is to do something that connects your house with your gardening design. So if you have a house that looks sort of like this kind of cozy cottage, your garden style on the outside might look like an English cottage garden. Exuberant flowers everywhere. And this can be done with native plants. I think that's probably very English, but it can certainly be done with Kentucky plants or wherever you happen to live. If your house is sort of a modern minimalist, you may want a garden that looks more like this. Now, I'm not sure what kind of plants those are. I just took this picture, but imagine, if you will, that the plants in the back are yucca that attract the yucca moth, or perhaps rattlesnake master, and that those grasses are native Kentucky grasses. And so that could be a native plant garden, even as minimalist as that is. You may have a very grand kind of formal house, in which case formal style garden could work. If you have a craftsman style garden, you can, a lot of things work with that. Oriental gardens can work nicely with a craftsman style. So that's just one way to sort of integrate your house and your garden so they look like they belong together. Now, you may have a house that is not perhaps the house you wanted, or you have a very different gardening style, and that's fine. It's where you live. You can decorate it however you want. But if you are something you want to consider, you can think about what works, what makes my house and my garden look like they belong together. If you're doing container gardening, there are many styles you can do with container gardening. You can, again, have a very minimalist containers, very white, or you can have sort of exuberant on top of each other. If you have a small area, you can put your containers so that they climb vertically and get more plant area. So many ways you can do a very small garden with containers too. So, okay, so that's kind of a large scale garden design, sort of landscaping. We're talking tonight about a small garden. So one way to say, well, I don't even know where to start. I don't know what to do. One thing that could maybe help you get jump started is using a detail from your house. Take a look at your house, and the windows are often a good place to start, or the door. So there's our square 4x4 garden bed. What do I do with it? Well, I look at my door and I notice my door has a lot of diamonds in it and triangles. Well, maybe I can use that idea in my garden bed. Just sort of lay out my plants so that they mimic the shape of the door. And there's another way to do it. It's doing a cross sides instead of a diamond. But maybe my door has circles, circle window. That's easy. You can make a circle garden bed. Maybe I've got a checkerboard set of windows. I can make a checkerboard design in my garden bed. So then again, this is just something that kind of helps you get started. If you're stuck and you don't know what else to do, you can play around with this and see if it works for you. You don't have to do it. It's just a way that some people find it helpful to help them get started. A lot of people like to use raised beds. It's easier to reach. They have better soil for whatever reason. You can make a lot of raised beds. A standard size is 4 foot by 8 foot. You can subdivide that if you want to give it a little bit more definition and design. Here's one, you can sell these, they sell these as kits, these kind of curved beds. Seen people put them together to look like flower petals or clocks, all kinds of ways you can hook these together. And notice on this one too, they've also got 3 levels, low, medium, and high. And that gives you some more options and variety in your garden design. Okay, so the shape of the bed, it's not really all that important. It just needs to fit in your available space and look good to you. Let's talk about what goes in the garden bed itself. How do we create a microecosystem? Most garden beds are just soil and plants. There's a little bit more that we can add to them. Food, water, shelter, raising young. That's what we're looking at adding. What can we do? Oh, there's just a little box turtle. Water. Water is very important. And our garden beds are small, so we're looking at a small water supply. It can be as simple as a little saucer, like the little saucer that might come underneath a potted plant. And you can just set that down. When it rains, it'll collect water. If you remember, you can add water to it, or you can just leave it. And when next time it rains, it'll have more water in it. We do recommend that, especially if you're that you use rainwater or distilled water, and you can buy distilled water or boil it, or you can have a rain garden, rain barrel there and collect your own rainwater to fill up your water supplies. Animals are very attracted to moving water, and nowadays they've made these little pumps that are really handy that you have very tiny kind of fountains. And there's a little one in the blue jar here, and it just kind of comes over right over the top and just slides all the way down. And you'll find a lot of butterflies and birds and insects coming to take advantage of that. And in this one, you may not have noticed in that raised bed I showed earlier, but it has a water feature. It has a small, one of those little saucers I talked about, and rocks in there. And the rocks give critters a chance they can land on the rock and then reach over and get a drink. So that's very important, so they don't feel like they're going to drown. They're very tiny, a lot of our critters, and they need a safe place to reach the water. So that's very simple. Just get a saucer, stick it somewhere in your garden bed, and you've got water supply. It doesn't have to be a saucer. Seashells will hold water. If you have collected a bunch of seashells, maybe on a trip to the ocean, you can place them in your garden bed. You can do it in a decorative pattern. And eventually these will weather and break, and you'll have calcium from the seashells in your soil, which is a good thing. Or that's sort of just, I think, a little garden decorative. They look like cupcake tins, and they'll hold water for a short amount of time. One thing to be careful about, a lot of bird baths, some of them are very slick glossy ceramic or glass. That's very slippery and it makes birds uncomfortable. So if you have one that's very slick, put sand in the bottom of it so that they have a secure footing. Or don't buy the really slippery glass ones. And here's something else you can do with the water. It doesn't have to be just water. We talked about the other one we looked at had some larger rocks. This has a variety of footing for the critters. It has sand on one side, little pebbles, and then some larger stones in the center. So the different creatures have a chance to pick the kind of footing they like best so that they have access to the water. Butterflies will sometimes just land on the sand and just sort of, it's called puddling when butterflies do it, or mud. They can get moisture out of something that doesn't look very wet to us, but they don't need a lot of water. They're pretty small, so they can get the water they need that way. Another thing that you can place inside your garden bed is moist earth for nest building, a place where the water just kind of collects and the soil is very soft, or loose soil or sand. Bees nest in loose soil. If they can't dig through heavy clay, they have a hard time making their nests. So if we can have a place with softer soil for them, they will be happier and you'll have more ground nesting native bees. Rocks. I know most times we're trying to get the rocks out of our gardens. And certainly we don't want to have to dig in the gardens. But if you have a small decorative arrangement of rocks, it can look really nice. Maybe you're digging and you're finding rocks. And what happens a lot of times is people sort of pile them up and they make a wall. And that's actually great because the wall gives a place for critters to hide in all those little crevices. And you also don't have to carry the rocks very far. Again, a 4x4 garden bed is small, so we're talking small scale. I'm not suggesting great big boulders, but if you find a small collection of rocks, You may want to keep them in your garden in specific places. Logs, wood. Wood turns into really, really good soil. So it's okay to include some of that in our garden beds. Now, those are large scale ones again, but here's an idea of what someone did in a fairly small space. They had a tree that apparently had sort of a hole through the center of it, and they put soil in that and planted plants, and they made a sculpture with old logs. Now, eventually those logs will decay and make really good dirt, and they'll have to redo that bed. But in the meantime, they have a wonderful arrangement that has all kinds of habitat. There will be beetles underneath that bark. There will be birds who come to eat the beetles, and all kinds of critters in there, as well as a wonderful place for plants. This is kind of an all-in-one. I've talked about water and rocks and soil and all the rest of it. This is called an herb spiral, and they were, I'm not sure that I've heard about them for about 10 years or so. And the idea is you pile up, you put wood in the center here, you build a little wall with the rocks so it's getting taller to the middle, pile dirt on top, and then you put a bowl here at the bottom to collect the water. So at the top of this, you're going to have very well drained dry soil, which some plants like. As you go down the spiral, you'll have more and more water till at the base in here, which is where the water will collect, you'll have a lot more moist soil. You'll also, because you've built up a wall, created some shadow. So now you've got some plants that can handle shade as well as some that like sun, all in a very, very small space. Now, if you don't want to make a spiral, a circle, you can certainly do this in a square shape, like a ziggurat that's climbing up. And so that's an herb spiral. You don't have to plant it with just herbs, but that's what it's often called. Edging your bed. This is another way to kind of get two things all at the same time. This person has used logs to edge their flower bed. Great. The logs, again, will eventually decay, but in the meantime, they're providing a nice edging and making it clear that this is a garden bed. It's not just some plants that are stuck here, or sometimes the plants don't look all that great, so some people call them weeds. But if they're in a bed with defined edges, people are more likely to think, oh, I guess that's a garden. Other ways you can edge, this person has taken, they're called withies, long, skinny twigs and saplings, and woven them into a fence. And I think those are just pipes, but they've put little plants in the top of them and set them vertically. So there are many things you can use to edge your garden beds with. Here's rocks. This may be familiar to you. This is Kathy Morgeson's rain garden, and she has used rocks. Again, they provide all those crevices or habitat for insects. As they heat and they cool, the moisture will condense on the rocks and provide moisture for the plants and the critters. So what do we do with this? Imagine this is sort of, we're looking sideways, a cross section of a garden bed. We're going to go down, and then underneath all the dirt, we can pile some old well-rotted logs and bark, and that will help improve our soil and provide habitat. We could maybe excavate some of the soil and replace it with loose sand, or a mix of sand and soil, and that'll be a habitat for bees, and that's this little bowl here. We can pile some of those little rocks we found and just sort of make a separate little spot where there's a whole bunch of them all together, so there's space in between. Well, we probably don't want to be digging in there with our shovels, so we could put perhaps a bird bath right on top of that place of sand and little rocks, or perhaps one of those logs that we saw, decorative stumps. And so here's another decorative stump over here, or maybe it's edging at some other rocks. Perhaps that could be edging around the outside bed. So this is all way in a very small space. And again, we're talking small scale, just a little patch of sand. You can get all of this in and create options and variety for your ecosystems. And we've talked about all this. Let's put it into practice and see what we actually do. Here is a house, new build. It's very square. There's not a lot of curly detail to it. So I'm thinking probably a square shaped bed. And it looks like the person would like to do a garden bed right there in the front, in front of those windows. And now we're standing at that porch looking out, and they have got a lot of gravel around the house. And then here's the garden bed they want to work on. So what do we do? It's traditional to test your soil, make sure it's okay, and amend it if need be. especially if it's a new build or you've never been there and you're not sure what the soil is like. Maybe somebody had a dog run there and there's a lot of dog urine in the soil. Maybe that's where somebody dumped their cans of old paint. The soil can have some issues. You can just stick some stuff in, and if it grows, don't worry about it. But if you try growing and nothing looks happy there, you may have some problems with the soil and you may want to get it tested to find out what's wrong. So the other thing this person did was they put in a couple stepping stones so they can get across the gravel. And in here, they've got basically a rectangle area to do a garden bed. So 4x4. These are all the stepping stones we just sort of saw from the other angle. This is north, I guess, or south. So we've got a lot of sunshine. This is a sunny spot. Okay, so what do we know about what can we put in a garden bed? Generally speaking, plants should not be taller than half biggest dimension. So a 4x4 bed, you don't really want plants that are much taller than 2, maybe 3 feet. They start to look unwieldy and they fall over. The only change to that be if you have a vine or if you have a tall fence around it somehow to hold the plants in. But generally speaking, plants shouldn't be much taller than the size of the bed they're in. The person doesn't want to have to do a lot of weeding, so they want the plants to stay contained in this garden bed. Pollinator friendly, looking for some color. Symmetry is important. And they'd like it to look nice from both directions, coming and going, because as you saw, there's a pathway that goes back and forth. And it's visible from outside the house and from inside the window. So some beds you only really design for one side because they're back up against a wall, but this one has people on all sides. So we want it to look nice all directions. So there's our square. Person decided to go with a diamond shape just to get them started. Now you can just have that in your head, or if you want to, you can outline these shapes with bricks or the little rock walls we talked about if you want to, or logs. Or you can just use the whole bed as is and not worry about subdividing it into shapes. So the person decided to do little short plants on the outside corners, especially if something's next to a walkway. You want to keep the plants short there so they don't get in the way of people walking. How many plants? You kind of get a sense of how big are these plants going to get. You count how much space you have. You kind of little circles can be helpful for this. How many are you going to need? Now, if you can get the plants cheap, or that's not an issue for you, you can go ahead and buy as many plants as you need right at the beginning. A lot of plants will make babies, so you might only get 4 plants for this, have them make babies, and then the next year you'll have enough to fill in all the corners. It's up to you to decide how quickly you want this bed to be finished looking. Okay, so those are small, short plants on the outside. We're moving to the inside and the plants are getting bigger and taller. Now we haven't really picked the plants yet. We're just sort of getting a sense of how big we want things to be and where we want to put them. And then in the middle, we're going to have kind of a specimen plant. Tallest will go in the center, and it'll be the one that draws the eye, and the others kind of lead up to it. One of the handouts that I sent it's called a diorama drawing. And the idea is you do this as you draw kind of the vertical elevation and the floor plan of it. And then you cut that up and then you fold it together and you get a 3D visual. Now, for a small bed, you may not think that this is needed. For larger designs, you may think that's helpful. A lot of people like to see things better in 3D. If you remember back in, like, I don't know, 3rd or 4th grade, you used shoe boxes and you made dioramas and you kind of did, the cotton balls from the ceiling as clouds. So if that helps you, or if you find it fun, go ahead and play with these just so you can kind of get a sense of what it's going to look like. Much easier to do it in paper than to be out there digging and shoveling and moving things. Above and below, we talked a little bit about putting the sand and the logs in the soil, but that's not all we're going to put in our soil, right? We're going to put plants in there. And so we have to make sure there's room for their root systems. So the tubers, corms, bulbs, all those things, they all come different sizes, different shapes. They're planted at different depths. So you want to make sure that they all fit, and that they're not going to be too crowded. So you might want to have some plants that have big bulbs, and those are usually planted deeper And then you can plant little bulbs kind of above and to the sides, and they'll all fit together. That gives you an idea of how deep their root systems can go. The one in the middle here with this yellow stripe is basically lawn grass, which doesn't have a very deep root system. Some of these plants can get quite deep. Now, if you have a garden bed, your bed is on a place, maybe there's something, you only have a foot of soil because there's an old walkway or something under there, or you've got, like I do, frangipane there, and stuff doesn't grow. You'll want to look for a plant that doesn't have a really, really deep root system. Spiderwort, pretty sturdy plant, but its roots don't go down more than 8 to 12 inches, so it could grow in a shallow bed. If you have extremely shallow soil, like hardly any, you might want to start looking at moss or one of these little grasses that doesn't need a lot of deep roots. So that's something to think about. And then I like to sketch it out just to make sure things fit. So here's some coneflower, and you can see their roots go here. And then the little short plants, they have short roots, so they kind of tuck here. This guy is a taller grass, and its roots are going to spread out to the side a little bit. But by and large, they're not competing directly with each other too much. The root systems can coexist in this space. And above, the plants aren't going to bang into each other too much. I've got a tall one, and then a lower one, and then another tall one. If you put two tall plants right next to each other, they don't have a lot of space. But if you put a short plant in between them, these two tall plants can have room, and then the short plant in between kind of gives them a little breathing room. Plants are too close together, they don't get enough air movement around them, and that can lead to fungal infections and things like that. So give them some room to breathe, and space the tall and the short and the medium, kind of make everybody fit like a puzzle. Blooming every season. This is important for pollinators. They're always hungry. They're always looking for food. It's nice if we have at least one thing in our garden that's blooming. Now, in a 4x4 plot, that can be tricky to do because we don't have a lot of room. But we can see what we can do and to see if we can get something. So the plants that I had picked out, I looked at them, just looking at them, and I said, okay, I've got something blooming from April to June, May to June, and June to August. But in Kentucky, our growing season doesn't really end until October. I don't have anything blooming in the fall. So I might want to go back to my list of plants and see if I can find something that blooms later in the year. And so what I have done here is I've taken out some of those little guys that bloomed in the spring and put in plants that'll bloom in the fall. So I've got 4 kinds of plants now instead of 3, right? Yeah. And so that extends my blooming season. Now you notice I haven't gotten very detailed about what plant those are. That is the final decision you make, really. Sort of like picking when you're decorating your house, your pillows, you usually get them after you buy the big things and get the big decisions and you built the house. So garden design, where's your bed going to be? What shape is it going to be? And you get that figured out. And then you start saying, okay, now I'm ready. I've done the big purchases and the heavy work, and now I'm ready to decorate. I'm ready to hang the pictures and pick the pillows. That's the plants. And so that's kind of the last thing you do. It seems weird. It seems backwards of how gardening should go. You want the plants first. So, I mean, I know I've done this, and I'm just wondering if anybody else has. I've gone to the store and I bought a plant and I brought it home, and I have no idea where I'm going to put it. So it's better to have a place for these things, and then when you bring them home, they can go right where they belong. So there is the longer blooming season. Okay, so here's the plants. This is just one set of plants that fits the requirements. The little short guys is going to be blue-eyed grass. It's called grass. It's technically in the iris family, and it's purple, and it's going to be in these 4 corners like here. Okay, there's a picture of blue-eyed grass in bloom. In the middle is a taller grass, but in the spring, it hasn't done very much. So it's just sort of a bunch of little green stuff. Doesn't really have much color to it either. As we move into the summer, those blue-eyed grasses are just all those flowers will be gone, and it'll just look like normal grass. But the cone flowers, these purple circles, are starting to bloom, and they get taller. And I've got 4 of those, 1 in each corner. So that's my summer flower. In the fall, those coneflowers are going to be done. They're going to turn into, these are the seed heads of the coneflowers. I'm going to leave them up for the birds. But that center grass that in the spring didn't look like much has decided it's time to bloom. And so it fountains out and gets much taller, sends up these sprays with the little dangly red flowers and takes over most of the bed and basically fills the entire space. And there's the little red flowers dangling. And you can see this grass has become much larger and fluffier and just sort of fountains out and takes over. And there's a picture demonstrating how much it's spread out. So that is an idea of a simple, fairly simple, couple of different plants, couple blooming seasons for a small garden bed. Here's a couple problems you might run into. So I did that garden bed and the grass was taller than I had realized, and it was shading out the coneflower that I had put in behind it. And so that coneflower wasn't happy. So I ended up kind of lifting everything out and rearranging it. And I moved the grass farther back and I put all 4 coneflowers in front of it. Back here, it was still pretty shady. So that was where I put my little patch of soil for the bees and a little bowl of water. And I didn't expect a whole lot to grow back there because it was getting too much shade. The nice thing with a small bed is it's relatively easy to rearrange and redo. If these are trees, it's a lot harder to move. Oh, and then there's my little fall flowers that I added at the end. Another thing I might have considered doing is adding a trellis in the back and have a vine grow up. That would have gotten more sunshine. So if you have a bed that backs up to a wall, you might consider putting in a trellis and increasing your space for plants. Some other challenges you might run into. This person had a lot of shade, and so they went with a moss garden, which I think is pretty amazing. I think it's very pretty. And then they went around the outside with the kind of dark orange pine needles and did moss and rock. And there's a lovely garden. It doesn't have a lot of color and it may not attract a lot of pollinators, but it's better than just plain mulch. There's more variety and more options there. This is a garden, the space between the sidewalk and the street, if you're in town, often it's called the hell strip because it's hard to get anything to grow. And this is a garden in Berkeley, California. So it's California native plants, and those are California poppies. And then there's a tall grass here. You can see it's in flower. And this is a ground cover called California lilac. And so she has made a garden in the hell strip. Whoops, a little too fast, sorry. But that is a challenging site. There's usually the soil isn't very deep and it's hot and people step on it. So you have to put a plant that can handle that sort of rough treatment. This person didn't have much room at all. They said, that's okay. I'm going to do a fountain. I'm going to provide water, pollinators, and I'm going to put in a vine. And that's their garden. One plant and some water, and that works. Okay. So native plant landscaping. What's the difference between that and regular landscaping? How do we landscape with local plants that are local to our area? The exact same way you landscape with any other plants. Any garden book you pick up will have ideas on design and arrangements and stuff like that, and they work for native plants. You ask the same questions. Do I have sun or shade? Is it moist or is it dry? Soil? What's the growing zone? How cold does it get? Those are all the same questions you ask whether you've got native plants, local plants, or imported plants. Do you want to plant, are your plants going to be edible for you or strictly ornamental? How much space do you have for these plants? What colors do you want? Do you have something for every season? These are all questions any gardener is going to ask when they start design. So just because you're using native plants doesn't mean you can't also read any of the gardening books that are out there. And what are your overall goals and plans in this garden? There are, however, all of that is the same, but there's two things that native plant gardeners often do differently. We're trying to attract pollinators. So we want to have large blocks of color. so that the pollinators, as they're flying overhead, can see us. If we have one plant, unless it's a tree, they can't see, one plant from high above. But if you've got a whole block of them, a whole, 2x2, 3x3 square foot area, they can see that from higher up, and they're more likely to come down to it. And not only that, but if they lay their eggs there, say you're a caterpillar and you're eating, and there's one plant, your mommy laid you there and you're eating, you're having a good time, and you eat the plant, but there are no plants like that anywhere within 50 feet of you because the person only planted one plant. You're going to finish that plant, and then you're going to look for, more food, and there isn't any. So that's another reason to put a bunch of plants very similar close together to make a big patch. The pollinators can find you and the caterpillars have enough to eat. The other thing that native plant gardeners often do is they leave the seed heads. A lot of people talk about putting the garden to bed, cleaning up the garden, tidying up, and they'll go through and they'll clear cut everything that grew. They'll take out all the dead branches, all the seed heads, everything, and they'll scrape it down to basically nothing, and they'll start over again in the spring. That's not how nature usually does it. And if you leave the seed heads up, some of them are really amazing looking and got really cool shapes, but you will attract birds. Here's a little goldfinch on a coneflower. So this is the putting the garden to bed. Seeds are food, and that's one reason to leave them up. Now, you maybe have a garden bed that's close to a walkway, and the seed heads are flopping over a lot or getting in the way. And one way you can do is just cut them off and put them in a flower pot and put them somewhere else. And so that they're still up and vertical so that the birds can find them, but the garden bed that's close to a walkway is tidier or it doesn't get in the way as much. And so that's one way to kind of do both at the same time. Dead stems and leaf litter are beds. Seeds are food, dead stems are beds. And if we clear all that out, we've ruined the house that the insects are trying to use. So another thing is leave the stuff there. You can tidy up, get it off the sidewalks, maybe clip it short where it's close to a walkway. But if you take it all out, you've kind of defeated the purpose of encouraging critters to come live in your yard. Okay, plants. This is some of the plant options that I had showed a little bit ago, the blue-eyed grass. But if I didn't want to use blue-eyed grass, I wanted another short plant. I could use violets, verbena, Venus looking glass. My center plant, I mentioned side oats, grama grass, but it could have been pink muhly or prairie grass, butterfly weed, or a larger coneflower. Any of those would have been a good center focal plant. Here's another yellow plant. And I'm just going to go through some pretty pictures so you can see that native plants can be quite pretty. This is Stokes aster. This is Carolina spider lily. It has long, those like white sepals. Butterfly weed. This is a favorite of monarchs. Black-eyed Susans, very good ground cover. This is pink muhly when it's in flower in the fall. It's a stunning, stunning plant. Here's a picture. This is Kate Brandis. She did a marvelous book, and there's a link to it at the end and on our website where she shows examples of garden beds. And so here's a mailbox, just a small area, and she's got butterfly weed on the edge. You can't see it, but in her drawing, there's prairie drop seed plants in the back, Missouri primrose, and then behind here will be some black-eyed Susans and then some ornamental grasses. Very simple, 5 different plants, and it makes a nice little garden bed. And here's another sort of design of a 4x4 plot. You can pick any of these, kind of just gives you an idea of options and what fits. And you can, it's sort of like Chinese restaurants, one from column A, one from column B, and put it all together and just lay them out the way that you think it looks nice. Again, this is all going to be recorded, or it is being recorded, and it'll be available so you can look at it in more detail later on. And here's one for sunshine. So 6 basic steps I'm going to go over them one more time. First, dream. What do you want? What do you want in this garden? What do you want it to do? 2, practically, what can you do? 3, how can you add things that make it a microecosystem? How can you add a little bit of water, a little bit of wood, a little bit of stone? What plants are possible? That can be a huge list, and there are some websites that kind of give you a way to sort and filter. You may just see one, you think it's pretty and you want to include it. So after you've got a list of things to choose from, then you have to narrow it down and pick 4 or 5, maybe 6 different kinds of plants. 4x4 isn't very big. And you sort of say, okay, yes, this one, it blooms in the spring, this one blooms in the fall. So you sort of do this whole juggling and rearranging and trying it out until you get a collection that works together. And then you plant them. That's the 6 steps to making a garden bed. Here's a couple resources you might find helpful. The ecoregions is in bplant.org. It also has a list of plants, an amazing resource. The Web Soil Survey, if you're curious to see what kind of soil is in your yard. Call before you dig, 811, very important. So you don't run into any wires or anything. This list is from Backyard Ecology, which is itself a marvelous resource by Shannon. I think she's with us tonight. And she had put this list together, and I was delighted to find it and sharing it with you. And they are also on the Soki website now, so you can click on the links there. And these are all really great resources about garden design and also finding plants that work in small spaces. The National Wild Ones website, we're a chapter of Wild Ones, but the national site has this collection, and they're still adding to it, 19 different full-scale landscape designs. And this shows you kind of where they are around the country. Now, but there's one of them, St. Louis is pretty much our same climate and soil. But if you go here, you say you like the design for Las Cruces. Now, the plants may not work, but you can use the design and then just use the plants that they used in the St. Louis and just use the same sort of layout. That's if you're doing your whole yard or you just want to see what they're doing. That's an amazing resource. Go to the Wild Ones website and click on the native garden links and just pick the city you're interested in, see what they did.
And there's a website by the Lexington, Kentucky city government, and they actually call it plant by numbers. It's like paint by numbers, but it's plant by numbers. And
Yeah.
so they have a lot of different garden designs, like around a mailbox, in front of your house, along an easement, along like a road, sun, shade, part sun. And you can look at all those designs, and they have multiple options. I think they have at least 2 options for every number, which represents a plant in the garden design. So it's the same thing that you were talking about. So we can call it plant by numbers instead of paint by numbers, but that resource is also on our website. She said she changes the water bowls that she has out for birds every day. Do you mean that water from a hose is not good?
It depends on the water of your system. Some people prefer to use distilled water or rainwater only, and I guess it depends. I mean, if you drink the water and you think it's fine for birds, I use hose water too. Cleaning them is a good idea, yes. I know some people were concerned about mosquitoes. If they're shallow, they'll evaporate in a day, usually around here, and that so you won't get mosquito larvae. If they're really deep or you have a larger water system, you may want to put in the dunks. You can buy those. They're just little kind of, I don't know, pellet looking things, and they kill off mosquito larvae if that is a concern for you. And the other thing is make sure you don't have pots sitting around your yard that collect water and have standing water for days at a time, because mosquitoes will breed in very small spots like that.
Where would you go to find the plants that you want to put in your garden? Like how if I don't know about native plants, how would I know which native plants to choose, and where would I get those?
Go to Wild Ones, and even if there's not one near you, they may know people within stores within 100 miles, because they can recommend certain places. Of course, we are lucky to have Shannon Gimboli here with Backyard Ecology, and she sells native plants. There is Alicia, and she will be at our plant sale this Saturday. She's going to be at the farmers market selling plants too. So some of them are available by mail. The other reason to get in touch with Wild Ones is there are people in Wild Ones who have extra plants. Maybe their plants are making, like I know I've given away many button bushes because I have 3 grown-up ones and they're making lots of babies and I don't need that many. So if you can meet somebody who's been doing this for a while, they may have plants to give you for free. I think firefly larvae like to nest in rotted wood and under bark. So if you have a tree come down, or you have a spot where you can leave large pieces of wood and just, you don't have to mow around it, it's kind of off to the side in your yard, that would be helpful. They also like tall grass when they get bigger. If you leave some areas of tall growing grass, the grown-up beetles will be in there during the day, but the larvae need wood.
Shannon Trimboli has a podcast called Backyard Ecology, and she did an entire episode of her podcast on lightning bugs and fireflies. So if you want to learn more about their life cycle and creating habitat for fireflies, then I highly recommend checking out the Backyard Ecology podcast.
I'm attracting butterflies and caterpillars, but we have so many birds, the caterpillars keep disappearing. And I don't know if there's, much to do about that. Just let them all get eaten.
Some people have started putting netting around their plants, but you need to let the butterflies in. Or bringing the chrysalises, the butterflies, and I'm sorry, the caterpillars and some leaves inside the house. But that has issues with overcrowding and disease and stuff like that. And other people just, it is a balance. I mean, the birds need to eat too, and that's what baby birds like to eat, is caterpillars. So the best thing I guess we can do is plant more plants and encourage more butterflies. Donations, if you'd like to encourage or help the work of Wild Ones, donations are gratefully accepted through our website. And we'd love to have you come to our gatherings. And if you're not in Kentucky or Central Kentucky, look for a Wild Ones near you. We encourage you to go to those and meet other people interested in this and get involved. Thanks so much for coming in tonight. I appreciate seeing you, and thanks for checking in.
Thanks, Janine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.